Shalom everybody, Yishay Fleisher here on a very special broadcast for 72 years, honoring and marking 72 years of Israeli independence. Israel Independence Day is coming, and that's right after Passover, right after Israel Holocaust Memorial Day, and it brings up issues of freedom, of liberty, of nationalism, of heritage, of biblical heritage, and really the question of what is this all about? What is this project all about? Is it an important project? Is it one that's really changing the world? Is it just protecting Jews? Is nationalism something that's important to all of us? Is liberty really in the cards? Or are we being shut down from liberty? Of course, I'm also talking in light of the coronavirus situation and all that's happened in the last few months. Altogether, there's a lot of questions out there. Well, I have a great way to answer those questions, and that's some of the cultural icons of today, superstars. That really, not only are they smart, but they really shape the way so many of us think. They get it out. They're artists that ship. They really get it out to the world. And we have with us three amazing people, Katie Hopkins, Caroline Glick, and David Horowitz. Let me talk a little bit about some of these people who are really all heroes of mine. Caroline Glick is a senior columnist at Israel Hayom, Israel's leading newspaper, and senior fellow at the Middle Eastern Affairs at the Center for Security Policy. She's the author of The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East. That's one state, not two states. And she's the author of other books as well. All have been vetted and endorsed by people like Vice President Mike Pence, etc. She has been Prime Minister Netanyahu's foreign policy advisor, assistant foreign policy advisor, and in her previous, and we'll see also like David, in her previous kind of life, she was also a core member of Israel's negotiating team with the Palestinians. Her writing appears everywhere, including Wall Street Journal, New York Times, National Review, and others, commentary. But really, anybody who's an Israeli nationalist or a pro-Israel nationalist knows Caroline Glick's writing. And I'm talking about in Hebrew and in English. So that's incredible to have her with us today. Katie Hopkins, another amazing lady, is a British conservative. First thing is that she came to visit me in Hebron and started fighting with everybody who was a bad guy. So Katie Hopkins is a British conservative media personality, a newspaper columnist, radio show host, known for her unflinching reporting in hostile environments. She's actually, she may not look it, but she's a trained economist, a graduate of the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, and she served in the Army for 35 years before leaving to run a management consultancy. That's all good, but then she was selected as a candidate on the British Apprentice show, became quite famous, and from then her career took off. Today she's the most read columnist at Daily Mail, most listened to Sunday commercial radio show host in England, appeared on BBC, Fox, Carlson, Hannity, etc. And she is one of President Trump's most ardent supporters. She's one of the few people that he does follow. And she has 1 million followers on Twitter and a best-selling book called Rude. And when you hear her talk, you'll know why. And then we have with us, of course, David Horowitz, who is one of the leading lights in our generation, a conservative thinker and writer, who didn't start off that way. By the way, I read about him that the question mark is, when does he eat or sleep? Because he's really authored dozens of books. He began as a left person, in fact, one of the founders of the New Left, and in the 60s was the editor of the left's largest magazine, Ramparts. But he explains in his best-selling autobiography, Radical Son, how he transitioned away from that, ultimately finding a political home, an intellectual home, and as a conservative activist. He started the David Horowitz Freedom Center, whose mission it is to defend free societies in places like the United States and Israel, amongst others. He has fought many political battles, exposing deadly intentions of jihadism, challenging left-wing indoctrination in K through 12 public schools and then universities, and advocating to withdraw funding for terror-affiliated organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine. He's the author of many books, including The Black Book of the American Left, a 9-volume collection of his conservative writings over the past many decades, and also 3 books already on the Trump era. That is an amazing achievement, and you guys are all amazing. And we have also, together with the 3 amazing stars that we also have an amazing holiday that we're celebrating. That's 72 years of Israeli independence, and along with that, also 100 years since the San Remo Accords in 1920, where the Allied powers that were victorious in World War I came to take apart the Ottoman Empire and decide who's going to get pieces of it. They did that on April 25th, 1920 in San Remo, Italy. And of course, that was also the birth of the Jewish state in the land of Israel. So before we go on, I want to ask all three of you. I'll start with Carolyn. Carolyn, if you could give us just a few words on Israel independence, what it means to you, and how do you celebrate it?
Well, since we're in coronavirus time, I think we're going to be celebrating with the barbecue in our backyard. But the rebirth of the state of Israel after 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people, was a singular moment in Jewish history, and I dare say in human history. I grew up in Chicago, third-generation American from a family that had immigrated to the United States from Eastern Europe to run away from the pogroms, and so was saved from the Holocaust. And it just seemed to me, as we were learning about Zionism and about Jewish history as a schoolgirl, that while I love the United States and I couldn't be more grateful for all the wonderful things that the United States gave to the Jewish people in terms of having the first time having full civil rights and freedom and equal citizenship in a country of our dispersion, that in 1948, a miracle occurred. And we brought about the miracle to a large degree, the Jewish people did, where we reconstituted our homeland against all odds, against superhuman odds, in fact. And it seemed to me like it would be extraordinary it would be an extraordinary mistake not to take advantage of that and to be part of this experience of the Jewish people. I mean, it has never happened before in human history that a people was dispersed, maintained itself in exile for 50 generations, maintained its faith, maintained its attachment to its homeland, maintained its attachment to one another as a people, and through everything, through persecution, through expulsions, through pogroms, through the Holocaust, through generational attempts by the enemies of the Jews to simply wipe us off the map, as Ahmadinejad said in 2006 regarding Iran and its nuclear weapons program. And we survived, and we maintained who we were across time and space. And after 50 generations, we came back and we rebuilt our country. How would anybody want to stay away from that? I mean, I can't imagine a more inspirational event. And so from the age of 12, I wanted to make my life here. And I did when I was 21, after I graduated from Columbia. And you mentioned my early days as a negotiator with the PLO. Well, that was during my military service. I served in the IDF as a captain for 5.5 years. And it was during the course of my military service where I was called to be a member of the Israeli delegation to talks with the PLO. And so, you know, I think I'm extremely privileged. I know my children are probably the most privileged Jewish children to have been born, because they're living in a Jewish society as free boys, surrounded by people who love them, in a country that's flourishing and prosperous, where they're free to be Jews in any way they choose, or at least in any way I'll let them. And you know, I mean, I can't think of a more miraculous thing, and I can't think of a greater privilege than to be a Jew living in the state of Israel today. So what Independence Day means to me is we're doing it. We survived. We came back. We built our land, and we're continuing to build it. We're fighting for it. We're paying for it. But we're doing it, and it's a miracle, and I feel very blessed.
Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you for giving us continued strength to fight and knowing what to fight, because sometimes the enemies are hidden, and we'll get to that a little bit. Katie, you're the only member of our panel today that's not exactly a member of the tribe, but you are as close as they come. And when you came to Hebron to visit the tomb of the fathers and mothers, the biblical fathers and mothers, you also immediately understood all the challenges that Israel faces, all the left accusations that we're somehow stealing somebody else's land, that this heritage is actually not ours, that we've co-opted somebody else's heritage. And you understood it immediately and started to fight with it. Tell me why a not exactly member of the tribe, understands Israel, feels for Israel. And how do you feel on Israel's 72nd anniversary?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. Last time I saw you, we were standing on the steps in Hebron of the Tomb of the Patriarchs, the Matriarchs. And I remember you and I talking about how your brilliant land was growing. And you talked about how many million Jews there are now. And then the gentleman behind, who happened to be there to visit, started shouting out 20 million, 50 million, 100 million Jews. And that to me is exactly the way I feel. I'm not Jewish. I wish I was. And it's that feeling, it's an emotion I have that you can feel how you all connect with that place. And it is home. Anytime I to my Jewish friends, to you, to people in Israel, it's that absolute innate connection with a place that you call. It's so powerful. And I think to Caroline's point there, I'm a mother too. And what I admire about what Caroline says and what you're all doing is you're building a place and you're building a land, a home where you are proud and reassured that your children can grow up safe and be whatever they want to be, as far as Caroline lets them, or I would as my children, whatever they want to be in that land. And the one thing I wanted to say is that's what I now aspire to and I'm looking for, because as I lose my country and my country is taken over by a different faith, I am looking for a place for my children to call home. And it's always so uplifting to me. I've spent a lot of time with French Jews, German Jews, other Jews leaving Europe because it is no longer safe for their children, and making that same journey that Caroline has made. And to me, that's what Independence Day, really, that's how I feel it as a mother, is that you have created a safe home for your children to grow up in. And that's something fundamental to all of us as mothers or fathers, wherever we are.
Thank you very much for those statements. And you're totally right about children, especially now during the Corona time. We're like with our children all the time. One of the blessings has been is to actually spend more time with them instead of the rat race that we're usually in. And we just did have Israel Holocaust Memorial Day. And to watch, and I let my 12-year-old daughter for the first time watch some of the footage that they showed on Israeli television about Holocaust Memorial Day, and she was shocked, and she really began crying, and she even asked me, how did you let me watch this? And I said to her, because it's the truth. I can shield you from the truth for a long time, but at some point you've got to see what we faced, and when you see what we faced, you also understand what we've gained in the gift of the State of Israel. And really, Israel Independence Day is that realization of what could have been had we had Israel during the Holocaust. And we are very grateful to raise our children in this opportunity, in this life. Thank you very much for being with us, Katie. And of course, David, you are a member of the tribe, a famous one indeed. And yet you were part of a different tribe, a tribe that eschewed religion, like the famous John Lennon song, no religion, no borders, no nationalities. You were part of that founding radical left, which maybe even had certain beautiful ideas, but you understood that they were actually corrupt and they were power hungry. We're still struggling here with our beloved state of Israel to make it that state of liberty, to make it that place of, first thing, sovereignty in our own homeland, and to throw out that jihad that is within us and around us. But tell me how you see the state of Israel from all of your writings and all of your thinkings all these years, to see it now flourishing with 9 million citizens. How does 72 years make you feel?
Great. I see Israeli independence as framed by a 3,000-year war against the Jews. I think everything has to be seen in that light, that the Jews are the most persecuted people in the history of the world, and they've survived those persecutions, but barely. If it weren't for the state of Israel, there would be either no Jews in the Middle East left, or the Jews would be in a terrible, oppressed condition. The godfather Palestinian nationalism was a Nazi, Haj Amin al-Husseini. The Muslim Brotherhood, which originated the call to push the Jews into the sea and destroy the state of Israel, translated Mein Kampf into Arabic in the 30s. Haj Amin al-Husseini actually went to Berlin for the whole Second World War, raised an Arab battalion for Hitler, and designed his own Auschwitz for the Middle East, which was only thwarted because Montgomery beat Rommel at El Alamein. Otherwise, it would have been the concentration camps and the gas chambers in the Middle East too. No nation state, no freedom. In the era of nation states, I mean, the Nazis certainly showed that, but they were adherents of another religion. I think it was August Bäumel who said that socialism is the anti-Semitism of fools, because socialist people on the left are deluded into thinking there's over the rainbow. There's a world where there's social justice and everybody is happy and gets along. And these are people who have by nature, they despise the books of Genesis. I mean, the first murder is between brothers. War is the natural state of mankind. Anybody can see that. And we see even today, with the European Union about to collapse, that nationality, people, their customs, their traditions, and the basis of any freedoms that they have are built within a nation state. You want to understand why Britain is a free country, you have to go back to the Middle Ages and the Magna Carta. And all these traditions, all the laws, all the sense of what's right and what's wrong are built into a culture. And the culture is established within the confines of a nation state. So it's a miracle. It was a miracle that the Jews won the 1948 war. They're surrounded, Israelis are, of course, the Jews of Israel are surrounded by nations who want to finish the job that Hitler started, and have really no other rationale for being. There are peace movements in Israel. The peace movement in the Gaza Strip is maybe 10 people, maybe it's a few more. But roughly 100% of Palestinians vote for terrorists who proclaim in their charters that they want to exterminate the Jews. So I'm puzzled by Jewish stupidity in opposing the nation state and pretending that the Palestinians are something other than they are. I mean, there are good Palestinians, but there were also probably a lot more good Germans. And in the end, they didn't make a damn's worth of difference.
Powerful words. And indeed, Israel does struggle trying to find those good people within that society that's really all around us and within us. And those voices do come out, but of course, they are suppressed by the jihad here in the country. We have jihad even in Jerusalem. And not only are they bad to Jews, to Israel, but they're also bad to decent Arabs who want a decent life, want to raise their head up, but they can't. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit to issues that connect all three of our countries, Britain, the United States, and Israel. And I'll start off with a little story. You know, I'm a Zionist. I live in Israel, and it's been my dream to live in Israel all my life. But I'm also a New York Jew, in the sense that I grew up in large measure in New York, in that Babylon, big Jewish beehive, successful and beautiful. And you know what? I started taking the United States for granted, because that's the other place that I live. It's Jerusalem and it's New York, and I fly between them, and I started taking it for granted. I took a tour of Australia, and I started watching how Australians relate to the United States. And I realized the United States is not just my backyard. It's actually the super powerful country that has hard power, but also soft power, cultural power, that touches the whole world. And everybody looks to the United States, this big economy, this big cultural power. They look to this country to give it direction. But if we look to the United States today, we see an unbelievable divisiveness. There's a divide that has never been seen before. Such an atmosphere of contention. I saw it in my own family. They can't even talk to one another. Within a minute, the F-bomb is flying and people are standing up and they can't talk to one another. And so that's the atmosphere in the United States. That atmosphere is also in England. We saw with the Brexit, back and forth and such a sense of divide in England. And here in Israel as well. Are we a peace camp? Are we an annexation camp? Do we want to hold on to our land? Do we want to give it away? There's a sense of ambivalence and a divide. And that is really, that's marking these great democracies today. So I want to ask you, like, what is the cultural thing that's happening right now between all these countries? Is it all different, or is there something happening? Are we pawns of the media, or is this divide actual intellectual freedom and liberty, expressing itself in the difference of opinion, or is it really a conflict that's not good for humanity? And I'll start with you, Katie, because you yourself are often accused of fomenting such kind of tension between parties and understandings. Tell me how you see it. What is this divide all about?
Yes, and for any of your viewers or listeners that don't know me, I am known as a divisive figure. People say, you either love her or you hate her. I'm often seen as something of a villain, even on Israeli TV. And that's all about my personal belief. And it's actually a value we share that you have, this need for moral clarity. And I think moral clarity for me is about being willing to make tough decisions and know that there is a risk to those decisions, or being able to speak my truths, but knowing that the downside of that is not everybody will like me. And I have accepted and embraced that for a long time now. But how I see things, and the reason this is behind me, this is in my home where I live. I live in a great place called the rest of the UK. I should explain that the UK is made up of two places. One place called London, where people live that I have nothing in common with, have no wish to know, and is run by a small Muslim mayor that I have no time for. I live in a place called the rest of the UK, which is much more like our kind of Israel. It's a glorious place to be. And the reason I have this behind me in my home, it's an absolutely massive flag, and I have my Israeli flag over there too, is that these are the things that this is the place I come to when I need reassurance. And my belief, and it's a firm belief, is that across the globe, we are in this battle between darkness and light. And for me, America stands and shines the light very brightly. 64 million Americans who voted for Donald J. Trump illuminated the sky and stood up for strong national identity. And that's also what brilliant Brexiteers did. I'm a massive Brexiteer. And it was standing up for borders, for being proud of our country, for having a sovereign nation that we could defend, protect, and be proud of. And of course, when you come to Israel, and I spent time with Ori when I was in Israel last, and on the back of his amazing bike, as we whizzed around the streets together. And that's the defining thing of the Israeli nation. If you ask me what it is, it's that sense of being so proud of the nation that you're part of. So as much as there's this huge divisiveness that you speak to absolutely accurately, and as much as many families now don't speak to each other at all in America, in the UK, and as much as I know people who've changed their surnames so that they're no longer part of a family they don't recognize, what I actually see is this huge fight and push for unity across all nations, people who are proud and strong nationalists, who are proud of their own identity. We are joining up. I see us like spiders on a web, and we are joined on this strong web fighting for the things that we hold dear, which is the values of our country. And I think it's so important that we have people like Caroline, like David, like yourself, others that we know, calling out the difficult things that need to be said, because that is the moral clarity that we need right now. And I think that, to me, is where I stand. We look to America, we look to Israel, we stand together, standing up for our nations. And if I think coronavirus has taught us anything, it's taught us that actually borders do matter. And one of the first things that people called for when this virus started happening was to have borders re-established and reinstated. And for me, actually, that was quite a reassuring side effect of corona, is that people once more wanted their borders back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. All right, folks, we are joined virtually right now by two amazing men. Boaz Bismuth is the editor-in-chief of Israel's most popular newspaper, Yisrael Hayom, and he's being interviewed by advocate and author Bario.
Boaz, you are the chief editor for the most read newspaper in Israel, Yisrael Hayom, Israel Today. The struggle between the pro-national camp and the progressive bloc has many arenas: the academia, the judicial system, and also the media. Do you find it appropriate to promote pro-Zionist, nationalistic, and even patriotic values in the newspaper itself as an editor?
Well, I am very much honored to be the editor-in-chief of, how would I say, of a newspaper that represents or reflects what each and every or most Israelis in the street believe. I mean, let's not forget, I mean, if you look at newspapers 30, 40, 50 years ago, I mean, they would all be like Yisrael Hayom. Something has happened with my colleagues, not with me. I mean, I stayed, I mean, again, they're all exactly the same. I believe in a Jewish state. A Jewish state for me is going to be, of course, democratic. I mean, it goes without saying. We love our army. Our army is here to defend us. We believe in the rule of law, but we also believe in other institutions. We believe also in freedom of speech. We believe in democracy. We believe in the right of the Jewish people to exist. We believe in, and also maybe the most important thing is that we also believe that we're here, and we are also supposed to be in Judea and Samaria and in the Jordan Valley, not only for security reasons, with all due respect of security, talking all the time about security. Israel Hayom is not afraid of mentioning sovereignty. And when this state was created, we created it in the Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, because, I mean, of our right of sovereignty on this land. And all of a sudden, for some people, in the name of politically correct, in the name of being afraid of international media, and also in Israeli part of my colleagues in the Israeli media, we're like afraid or ashamed to mention our right being here. Or, for example, I think that the case of the national law was a great example that exposed to everybody how we totally, I mean, distanced the real reason why we're here. And that was the day of the state law. When I saw that very incomprehensible debate, is the day where I decided to put the Israeli flag on top of Israel's Hayom, every day a newspaper. The Israeli flag, because Israel Hayom so much thinks that this law is so much logical. And another thing, if you permit me, you know, when they speak about, yes, this state-nation law is a racist law. In what is it a racist law? In what way? I mean, in 48, we decided. So if the state national law is a racist law, then Zionism is racist. We're going back again to the same evil speeches that we all the time fought. And what really makes me sad is that among our camp, from our own country, from Israel, I mean, the dream that came true, we hear such voices, and really, I must say, it upsets me a lot. But, and you are finished, if I go on Twitter, if I open TV, then I can be very much worried. If I go out in the street, I'm very much relieved. The problem as editor-in-chief of Israel Hayom I have right now is that if I go out in the street, because of Corona, people stay at home. So I have a problem. This is why they have to find a medicine fast, or a vaccine.
I want to turn now to David. David, is there a future for the United States to continue to be a leader, or is this conflict are we gonna, like, sometimes when I watch the United States from Israel, I think to myself, they're eating each other apart. And when I get to America, I'm like, yeah, they're eating each other apart. Is the United States still going to be a leader in morality, in a vision of freedom, of strength, or is it going to dissolve kind of into smaller entities or have less of a strength in the future? Is it going to kind of go into decadence, or in a sense of kind of what I call the I generation, where everything is really about me and I? Is there still a light that's going to come out of the United States, or is this divisiveness going to finish off that great project?
Depends on which side wins. We're in the midst of a civil war. The Democratic Party is now a racist party. It's a communist party, and I say that as having grown up in the communist world. That's who they are. They hate America. America is based on individualism. They're collectivists. Identity politics, which is the creed of the Democratic Party these days, judges you by the group that you're part of. If you're white and male and a Christian or actually a religious Jew, then you're damned. You're guilty before the facts. And if you're a female of color and preferably not heterosexual, then you're innocent, even if the facts show that you're guilty. I mean, we have the spectacle now of the senile, probably has Alzheimer's, Biden is going to select the next, if he were elected, is going to select his vice president on the basis, but it's got to be a woman of color. I mean, how racist is that? And this has terrible implications for Israel. You have the Democratic Party practically to a man and woman supporting giving Iran nuclear weapons and $200 billion to be used for terrorist purposes, while there are 150,000 Iranian missiles aimed at Israel from Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. If the Democrats prevail, Israel is going to have to fight the war on its own, and it's not going to be. I say we're in the midst of a civil war. The reason that there's not a lot of bloodshed in the streets is because the federal government is too powerful. We can't have a civil war the way we did in the 19th century. But the war is for control of that federal government. And I mean, the mere fact that Bernie Sanders could be a leading contender for the Democratic nomination, this self-hating Jew, lifelong communist, or that Ilhan Omar, who does fundraisers for Hamas, should sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee and have top secret clearance. I mean, we are in a very, very dangerous situation. And if we didn't have a fighter like Trump, I noticed, while we're commemorating things today, Trump issued an order to the United States military to sink any Iranian boat that's harassing him. That's quite a distance from the Obama Kerry, whose family is married into the Iranian regime. These people who chant death to Israel and death to America. And what's mystifying to me is that there are so many Jews who have joined our enemies. And I say that both as an American and as a Jew.
But if I could just follow up with a little question for you. You mentioned President Obama, and then you mentioned President Trump. Like, is the United States schizophrenic? I mean, these are two polar opposites. They're not. Go ahead.
The left, communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, is a crypto religion. It's about redemption in this world. That they consider themselves social redeemers. They're saving the planet. They're saving the world. They're going to institute this kingdom of heaven on earth. These are people who have repudiated the lessons of Genesis. In Genesis, of course, is the story of origins where we had a paradise that was better than the Green New Deal. I mean, you didn't die, the fruit fell from the trees, but there was one thing that was forbidden, and that was to do evil. That's what eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil means. And, Adam and Eve wanted to do evil. Why? Well, the serpent seduced them by saying, if you are able to commit evil, you shall be as gods. And that's the delusion that every leftist has. They think they can remake the world, and there's no crime that they won't support or commit. to do it. And these can be, very nice people in ordinary life, but when they get into politics, they will sanction. Just like this campaign against Trump. I mean, it's now in the midst of a virus which threatens everybody, whether you're Republican or Democrat. The Democrat congressional leadership is conducting a war against the commander-in-chief. We have a democracy. He was elected. You don't like him, you win the next election. But they just want to sabotage the defense of the country against the virus. That tells you what traitors they are. And I know these are harsh words, but it was Confucius who said, or maybe it was, let's say it was Confucius, who said, in order to create justice, the first thing you have to do is rectify the names, call things by their right names. And if I can be slightly critical on this day that we're celebrating these Israeli milestones, I think the Israeli government has done a terrible job in fighting the propaganda war. You have to start with, you can't negotiate with the Palestinians. They're terrorists. Let them renounce terror, let them disarm, let them take those rockets down, and then you can negotiate with them. I mean, nothing showed the delusion of giving Gaza back to these monsters, should have convinced every Israeli and every Jew that's a dead end, that's suicide. These people it was the first day when the Israelis left the Gaza Strip, they started firing rockets into schoolyards in Sderot. These are horrible, horrible people.
I definitely agree with you, David, that negotiating with Hamas is an impossible thing. But I wouldn't negotiate with the PLO if they were the nicest guys on the earth, because this is our land.
Hamas is as bad as any Hamas. I mean, it's a horror. They're liars, monstrous liars. And I had this experience where I put up, I took out ads with the 10 genocidal lies of the Palestinian cause, beginning with the lie that Israel occupies 1 inch of Arab land. The land belonged to the Turks, who are not Arabs, let alone Palestinians. And they lost it in a war. Let's remember, after the Second World War, because Germany had started 2 wars in Europe, the entire region of East Prussia, the industrial heartland of Germany, was taken away and given to the Poles, and 12 million Germans were expelled from what had become Poland. That's under international law. That's justice. The Israelis made a terrible mistake in 1967 when they didn't just annex the whole West Bank, which is as you know, the homeland of the Jews anyway.
Caroline, you heard David's harsh accusations against the Democratic Party in the United States that according to him, is conducting a war against the commander-in-chief. Wow, that's a fifth column within your country. Here in Israel, it seems like we have a nascent government, an almost government, and that government seems to be bridging together center-left and center-right. Is this a hopeful moment for you? Do you feel like something has come due to the coronavirus, to the situation that the blue and white party broke into various shards and the more kind of nationalistic element or the more responsible element joined in? Or is that just a facade of political expediency and the rift in Israel is as strong as ever?
Yeah, I mean, Israel is in a similar position to the United States because we have a left wing here, which is comprised not only of the left, which is very small from a political perspective. They got almost no representation in the Knesset in the last elections or in any of the recent elections. The supposedly center-left parties are really non-ideological parties as they present themselves to the public, but actually what they're doing is they're advancing the positions of a very radicalized left. That is its most powerful feature is its complete control over the legal fraternity in Israel. That's the state prosecution or the Supreme Court. And these are very, very, very radical people. And, you know, when David was saying about the need to call things by their names and talk and use language for what it actually means, you see that the left in Israel has completely distorted it. So, for instance, until we had this sort of coup, rolling coup by the Supreme Court, which began as far back as 1993, when they started misinterpreting, overinterpreting laws to claim that there was something called judicial review that we never had, that the Supreme Court could throw out laws that were duly constituted, duly promulgated by the Knesset, our parliament, and then has just gone on from there to take over really all organs of government, and only just a few weeks ago to take over the Knesset functioning as well. You see that we don't have separation of powers here because we have three arms of government, but one has no checks or balances on it and is running roughshod over the other two. So we are in, and by the way, the rest of the arms of the left, particularly the media here, are pushing this agenda forward in the public and hiding what's really happening. And one of the ways that they do hide it is by misusing language, by abusing language. So they say that the rule of law is what they're trying to preserve in Israeli democracies, what they're trying to preserve, when what they're doing actually is undermining the very concept of law. Right? I mean, laws are supposed to mean something. You pass a law, it's written in language. If you're lucky, that language is clear and it doesn't require a lot of interpretation. And here, what they're doing is saying, no, it doesn't matter what the lawmakers wrote in the laws. It doesn't matter what they agreed to, and it doesn't even matter if what they said is clear as a bell. What matters is what we want. And we don't actually even need the law to tell us anything, because as a Supreme Court precedent, Esther Chayut said just weeks before she took over the court in a lecture to the Bar Association in Haifa, she said, we have to untether us, the justices, from the mere words of the law and go with our convictions. So this is really, David was talking about the left as a competing faith with religion, with God. And he's right. And here we see that this competing faith is this faith in the enlightened aristocracy of Israel, that they know better than the people of Israel what's good for us. And unfortunately, the values that they're extolling and the values that they're advancing through their seizure of powers that don't belong to them are very, very radical. I mean, they're anti-Zionist. They don't want Israel to be a nation state, which is why they've tried to undermine every legislative step that the governments and the Knessets have taken over the past 15 years to protect Israel, whether it's for enforcing our immigration laws against illegal immigrants from Muslim countries like Sudan and Eritrea that have turned South Tel Aviv from just regular working class neighborhoods into crime-infested, violent areas that longtime residents are afraid to leave their apartment or even be in their apartments. So, whether it's that or whether, of course, it's over and over and over again denying the property rights of Jews in Judea and Samaria and in unified Jerusalem, whether it involves working hand in glove with European-financed NGOs to stymie and gum up the works of the government to make it impossible for the government to enforce its laws equally towards Jews and Muslims and Christians in this country. And so trying to develop or create a norm that says that Jews, for some reason, are defective and that we're not able to equally enforce our laws towards people without prejudice, regardless of their creed. These are things that are antithetical to everything that this country stands for. And I think people woke up very late to this. I think people were unaware of the dangers. I think people weren't clear on what was going on. They were, of course, taken in by the misinformation, the deliberate distortion of the truth that they were being fed, force-fed really for over a generation by our media on a whole host of issues, among them this judicial coup that has been going on here since the 1990s. Of course, we saw it in the 1990s as well with the peace process, right? I mean, what David said is spot on. The Palestinians are genocidal. They want to annihilate the Jewish state. They don't support, they will not accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state in Israel. And yet we've been deluding ourselves. And I think a lot of it really doesn't have to do with peace at all. It has to do with power. And if you can convince the public that those who oppose giving Israel's heartland and half of its capital city to people who want to kill our children, then you're discrediting, you're delegitimizing your entire political opposition. You're saying that, and this is what we heard almost every day in the 1990s, that everybody who opposed this radical, insane strategy of appeasing the PLO, the architects of modern terrorism, was going to bring peace. And everybody who opposed that was referred to as what? Whether they were Hamas terrorists who were blowing people up in buses, or whether it was just law-abiding Israelis who were protesting against this carnage and against this insanity, they were all called enemies of peace. All of them. The moral equivalence between people who were trying to defend their country and people who were trying to annihilate their country was insane. And it's something that goes along. And I think that a lot of this really is just about an unreserved, an unbridled quest for power and oppression of your political opponents. I mean, obviously, we see it in the United States. We, of course, see it in Europe as well. And, that, I think, speaks to one thing that David said earlier, which was just that it's true that, one of the most miraculous things about the establishment of the State of Israel is that it wasn't just because of the Holocaust that we were such a small people. We were an ember of our own peoplehood for 2,000 years. We were pushed out of countries, we were massacred, we were burned alive, and forcibly converted out of Judaism, kidnapped, abducted, tortured. Unspeakable things and things that the mind can't get their arms around. You just can't comprehend the level of barbarism that has been inflicted on the Jewish people. And so when we finally formed our country, you got to wonder, how can you not, obviously to me, believe in God in the face of this, that we survived and we clung to our identity all these years. Before we started, Yishay, you were laughing at me or you were poking fun at me because my husband is from a family that comes from Morocco, and so Carolyn, the Ashkenazic Jew from Chicago, is making all this Moroccan food for the holidays and posting crazy Twitter videos and laughing at myself. His family, in a way, shouldn't have had anything in common with my family, right? We were separated by time and space for thousands of years. And yet you open up his prayer book, the prayer book that his parents and grandparents read in Casablanca. It was the same one, more or less, that mine did in Chicago and Brooklyn and Russia. And, that's amazing. And even inside of our own people, most of these Jews didn't want to come to Israel. A lot of the greatest opponents of Zionism from the dawn of modern Zionism were Jews who said, no, it's good for us in Britain, it's good for us in America, and if these Jews do their bit and build a Jewish state, then we're not going to be important anymore, and we don't want that. And they were some of the greatest propagandists against the establishment of the State of Israel. And one last note on that thing, in terms of revising language and all the rest of it. The reason that we survived is because of the Torah. It's because of the Bible. It's because of our faith. It's because of our abiding belief in the miraculous nature of God's covenantal relationship with us. I think the greatest means that our enemies have always used, whether it's the Romans or the Egyptians or the Babylonians or the Assyrians, and then on to medieval and modern times, the Nazis and the Palestinians and the international left, is a war on our memory, is a war on our language, is an attempt to distort language, whether it's the domestic opposition here at home, the left here in Israel, or Israel's enemies in Europe, or abiding enemies in Europe who've been continuing with their war against us still to the present day, even as the European Union collapses. This is what they care about. And of course, through the Arab world. that they just want to co-opt our history. They want to steal our history from us, attribute it to themselves, and call us strangers in our own land, to our own history, to our own God. Just recently, a Danish church just published a new version of the New Testament, which they call Bible 2020, and all mention of Israel has been removed. They've removed the word Israel. And I know that the Anglican Church and the Church of England was using a similar hymnal about 10 years ago, where they removed the word Israel from their own liturgies. So, this is what it's about. We are people of memory. We are people of faith. We are people who have always had our attachment to our land, and inside of ourselves and outside of us. The main cosmic and intellectual war against us has been a war against language and a war against our identity and a war against our memory. And so we just keep having to fight it.
I have to say that the greatest miracle of the ingathering of the exiles was when I saw you, an Ashkenazi girl, make that Moroccan mufleta, which is a Moroccan treat. It really said that East and West have come together. The Jewish people are home, and I only wish I could have tasted it. Due to the coronavirus, I wasn't able to come over and have some of that mufleta.
If I hadn't heard that much, I would have.
I'll get it next year with the help of God.
Wonderful, thank you. I have one last question, a little bit more theoretical. In the academia, they say that after World War I, nationalism was seen as the solution to conflicts. But after World War II, nationalism was portrayed as the cause of conflicts. Do you think that nationalism today can become a factor to allow not only peace between different states, but also within the countries themselves, solving inner issues?
Look, like everything in life, it depends, the level. It's like when, for example, you're at home and you listen to music, and the volume is different. It can change also the tune and the sound. So again, when we speak about national, you remember before that we spoke about the flag, you remember? So I remember, I'll answer by examples. I was correspondent, I think, where was I? No, I was in Mauritania at the time, and there were elections in France in 2007. And you had the conservative Nicolas Sarkozy, and you had the socialist Ségolène Royal. And the socialist, she was talking, and she was saying, French people, take out your flag. And she was attacked by her camp. Because, wow, she's becoming she's nationalist. As if you're a nationalist, you love your country, you love your nation, you're a fascist. So I know that this is a big debate, and also President Trump, don't forget, when he mentioned nationalism, you remember he was attacked and defended by others. Again, as I said before, let's not be afraid of words. How would I say? The question is, where do you take it? If me, for example, I say, my nationalism makes me think that I am the dominant and my country is above all the others, and therefore I should exist also, and the other one should serve me, etc., etc., etc. Bad, wrong. But if I think that my country is good, my country is great, I have to serve it, I have to respect it, I have to make it succeed in all means, and I'm proud of it, and I'm also not willing to give even a centimeter of it, then I'm patriotic, and it's totally allowed. It depends exactly what do you mean when you say the word. But again, nowadays, immediately, you've got accountability. If you dare to say nowadays, that this is what bothers, I believe, you and me and the people, who follow us this evening, that nowadays, you're supposed to love the world. You're supposed to love the people of the world. You're supposed to love everybody. But yes, so I'll give you an example. I love all the children of the world. I love all the kids. And honestly, I love kids. I think that children are amazing. I love my kids. But I take care, first of all, of 4 kids who happens to be mine. And it's nothing wrong about it. That's it. Beautiful. There's no crime about it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, boss. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us for part 1. But part 2, a second installment of this special broadcast is next, so stay tuned.